Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. The intro takes a little bit time to say, so I'm just going to go ahead and start now. Our webinar today is Grants, Tips, and Tricks from the Foundation side, presented by Diane Leonard. I will be your webinar facilitator today. My name is Alyssa Atkins and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, and trade secret and other intellectual property laws. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with the new platform and where things can be found. You can access a copy of today's slides and access today's webinar recording in the future by going to the courses section. The resource items for the download and the webinar recordings are available within the online courses when you go through the courses page. Each time you're ready to join one of our webinars moving forward, you will just log into the website and click on the large green banner that will be across the top of the screen like in this picture. Remember that you only have to register for the online platform once, and then you have access to every webinar instead of having to individually register for each one. When you first join the webinar called Virtual Class on the new platform, it will prompt you to complete an audio test before joining. Please select the listen only option so we can avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. We appreciate your assistance with this. If you're needing to change the speaker your audio is playing from, you can select the phone icon and this will bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so you can choose your preferred audio output. Even though you will be muted, we do still want to encourage your participation during today's webinar, and there are a couple tools you can use. Please note that if you are not muted, you can mute your mic by clicking on the blue microphone icon at the bottom of the screen. In the left-hand gray menu panel, you will see the public chat and shared notes and the users list. If you click on the shared notes, you will find a link for today's webinar feedback survey, a link to join our weekly email newsletter so you can always know when our webinars and various trainings are happening, a link to the new location of our Cathedral Webinars archive on our YouTube channel, a link to connect with us on LinkedIn, and a link to bookmark for easy login to Cathedral Constant Learning in the future. If you click on the public chat, you will see a chat open between all webinar attendees, then you'll see facilitator and your webinar instructor. Simply click on the box that says send message to the public chat, type the message you want to send and hit enter or click on the blue paper airplane icon to send your message in. Simply send your comments and any questions you have into the chat. Oops, sorry about that. Into the chat, and feel free to use the raise hand feature in the bottom right corner of the screen. If you think we have missed something along the way, any tech support issues can be submitted here as well. And I will do my best to help you navigate through it. Let's all get the chat box going together now by letting us know your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, and your work or role in Indian country. It is now with a pleasure that I introduce Diane Leonard.
Hello, everyone. So good to be with you today. And we are covering one of my favorite ways to talk about grants. I could talk about grants literally all day long, but I love it when I have the opportunity to use my past experience as a grant maker and also my current experience as a reviewer for different grant making bodies to help hopefully take some of the stress out of grants for you, your organization, and your colleagues. So I see some names that I recognize in the chat box. Good to see you again, but I don't know everyone, so I want to take a quick moment and introduce myself. I'm Diane Leonard, and I'm the president and owner of D.H. Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services. We do everything we can to help take the stress out of grants, whether it is with trainings like this or with helping with the writing work itself. And our team, we come from a wide range of backgrounds and degrees and winding paths that brought us here. And as I mentioned, for me, my winding path is in parts that I was a grant maker first. So I was the program officer for the Michigan Women's Foundation, which meant I was focusing on working with the grant making committee and our board to make grants for women and girls programming across the state of Michigan. Since that time, I've also served as a state reviewer, as a federal reviewer, and as a private philanthropy reviewer. So lots of tips and tricks from the grant making side that we're going to bring to you today. And I know I called it from the foundation side because that's where I was professionally paid to be a reviewer. But quite frankly, these tips do encompass all types of grants because I have had experience reviewing, scoring, and making recommendations for funding for all different types of grant funding. Now, I think the most important thing on that bio slide right now is about how I fuel my work, how I focus on being sustainable and not getting burned out. So that means one great cup of coffee. That happened hours and hours ago. Now it's just unsweetened tea, and some form of movement. Today it was very windy and I decided it was indoor cycling instead of running, but hey, that still checked the box for movement for me for the day. So that's what's fueling my work today. If you want to share in the chat, what is fueling your work today? Perhaps, I've got my sticker on, maybe it's that you're fueled by exercising your right to vote today. That could certainly fuel your work. Maybe it's some unseasonable weather. That's happening here in upstate New York right now and other parts I know of the Northeast and Midwest. But whatever it is that you want to say is fueling your work today, that'll let me know that you're here and can get to that chat box because I do enjoy having some chat conversation throughout these sessions with the Native Learning Center as you're comfortable using the chat box. I know it's not for everyone, but I do like to have a little bit of back and forth when possible if you are comfortable there. So drinking some tea. Yep. This is a very cold mug of tea at this point. It started with a delightful chai tea bag, though. And high five to the fellow voters on the line. That's awesome. So what we're going to cover today, what I have done is structured the session so that we're going to look at the different grant seeking best practices. And so we'll focus on some specific tips, some tactical suggestions in each of the best practice areas. You can ask me a question at any time. You can use one of the learning system reactions if you want to give a hand up. You can type your questions into the chat box, whatever works best for you. And yes, at the end, I will make sure that there are no outstanding questions, but I'd love to field your questions in the moment. So today's tips are all anchored in the grant life cycle. If you want to let me know in the chat box, how many of you have heard that phrase before, whether from me or somewhere else in the field? Could you let me know in the chat box? Y for yes, N for no. How many of you have heard the phrase, the grant life cycle before? The grant life cycle is relatively new. It's a few years old as some industry jargon for how we describe the best practices in grant seeking. And the idea is that just like maybe if we were thinking in nature, like the water cycle, how it's a continuous loop, ever circling, ongoing, same idea applies to grants. And so we look at it and read this image as if it was a clock on the wall. And so we look at that noon, 12 o'clock position at the top, and we start with readiness. What does it mean to be competitive and eligible? Before we would move into research. So learning about the funding opportunities and the funders themselves that might be the best fit for your organization. We then try to, as we move through the life cycle, we try to establish connections, have conversations, get clarification on their focus. That's our relationships portion of the life cycle. We're continuing on, then we're at about 6 o'clock, nope, 6:37, I should say, and we're at writing. Yes, you are correct. The R in writing is capitalized, and that is not traditional capitalization, but we do it so that all 5 of the best practices have a capital R to help us remember them. So we're using what we learned in readiness, research, and relationships to do our writing work. It is indeed where we spend the majority of our time in terms of the life cycle. And then once we click submit or put it in the mail or send it via email, and we do a bit of a celebration because we've got the grant out the door, we'll wait patiently, and then hopefully get a grant award, which means we have to talk about that fifth and final best practice, which is the reporting for the grant, so we can be a grantee in good standing and hopefully get the money again. So those 5 R's, also known as the grant life cycle, are going to be the structure that we're going to follow today. But before we talk about grant readiness, I thought we should make sure we understand a little bit about what it is like to be a grant reviewer. I'm curious if you could let me know in the chat box why for yes and for no. How many of you have ever had the opportunity, paid or volunteer, to serve as a reviewer for a grant maker, whether foundation, city, state, federal, a United Way? Just want to get a sense of who's in the room and if anyone has had that opportunity. I will say it is a fantastic professional development opportunity. If you ever have that come across your desk as something that's offered to you, I would encourage you to say yes. It's a great way to think about how your own work is going to be responded to, how folks read it for the first time, by getting on that other side. Today's topic, today's session is hopefully the next best thing. But if that opportunity, as I said, if it comes across your desk, by all means, I would clear my calendar, swipe everything to the side if I can, clear all my meetings, and try to be a reviewer. But in the meantime, let's try to give you as much perspective about being a grant reviewer. What is it like? Why are they trying to advocate for you? How are you getting money in the end? So reviewers, they have a wide range of practices, of review protocols that they're operating within. And so when we think about a reviewer, they might be reading a PDF at their own desk all by themselves and then joining a Zoom call in order to talk about it, or going to a conference room and talking about it. They might be reading the proposal in their own office and not talking to anybody about it, but rather typing their input into a Google form or some sort of shared portal where their feedback can be collected and aggregated to help the ultimate decision makers decide who gets money and who doesn't. But regardless of what the process looks like, whether it's together, whether it's separate, whether it's all online, it doesn't matter. There is something that is consistent about reviewers. And that is the fact that they can get really excited about the work that they're reading and what it is that gets them excited, what it is that might make them write or type positive comments, that might make them audibly speak up during a conference call or in a meeting room. That'll happen if they can sense how excited you are about the proposal. If they believe, after reading all of your different narrative elements, looking at your attachments, if they believe that you are the best suited group to do this work, they'll probably advocate for you. If they think that what you are requesting will actually create more return on investment, so more ROI than what the straight cash value might imply, they might speak up and say, I think this is a really nice investment for us. I think this will actually generate more impact than you could ever expect for $25,000. So these are some of the common things that get funders, that get grant makers, that get reviewers excited so that they want to know more. What I thought would be helpful, and I'm glad I had this idea, since especially not everyone in the room has had the chance to be a reviewer, I wanted to bring you into a committee room. So the situation that you see on the screen was one where an application portal was used to collect applications from a multi-county portion of a state, mostly very rural. And so everything came in to the portal and then was pushed out to the reviewers to read in anticipation of coming together in one day's worth of meetings to make decisions. No one had any pre-conversation. There were no conference calls in advance, no pre-meetings. It was going to be just one day of discussion. So everyone had read their assigned proposals in advance. They had come to them as individual PDFs. So each applicant that they were reviewing for had a PDF. In it was the narrative, in it were the budget documents, in it were all the attachments. So they were monstrous PDFs. And then everybody came together. And when everyone was together, well, that grant maker, they were so kind. They knew it was going to be a long day. And so they ensured the review committee had lots of coffee, water, soda, snacks, chocolate, and lunch. It was a very full day. Now you might say, okay, Diane, great. So they've read all the materials. They're well fed and hydrated. Now what? So the reason that the funder gave so much time on the calendar, ensured that there was enough that folks in the room wouldn't get hangry on them, was because this group, when they would pull people together, they usually took 5 to 6 hours to go through individually reviewing each application, letting folks talk about the questions they had. And then once they had walked through all of the applications, then they would start to deliberate who gets money. Now, I am not in this photo. I'm behind the camera. This was a committee that I was on, and they said I could take their photo and that I had their permission to use it. And as we look at this photo, what does this group have in common? Let me tell you a little bit about their background. Starting at the far left, we have Kathy, a social worker. Then we have Dan, a bank executive, followed by Keith, a manager of engineering quality control, and Felicia, an executive director for a land trust, and Heather, a mortgage broker. Oh, and your friendly grant professional behind the camera. We weren't subject matter experts in any of the same things, except the community that was being funded. So it was based on being representatives of the community where the dollars were going to be spent. And that was how the reviewer had pulled together actually multiple different review committees. So if you think about those very different backgrounds, even if we had had related professional experience that would make us more than dangerously knowledgeable about a topic, whether it was environment or health or education, there will always be differences in terms of what are people's backgrounds and what does that mean for the knowledge, the questions, and the perspective that they bring into the committee room. So what does it sound like when a group gets together? What does it sound like if they're advocating for you? So one example from that committee room, Kathy was, as a social worker, really well versed in a lot of the grant language, in what does it mean to talk about an output versus what is an outcome versus what is an objective. So to Kathy, that language all made a lot of sense in the application itself and the way that folks wrote their responses. Keith, the engineering manager, not as familiar, newer to the review structure, and so would occasionally have some questions, not just about, tell me again, what is an output? Could you clarify for me again what this SMART objective thing means? But to say, could you tell me if this makes sense? Is this feasible? Is this realistic? So asking questions about what they were reading and sometimes turning right to Kathy and saying, well, based on your experience, tell me what this means to you. Do you think it's appropriate for our community? So by asking to seek and finding clarification, that was because Keith wanted to know more. He didn't want to say no because he didn't fully understand. He wanted to seek additional information to have deeper clarification, deeper understanding, because he was interested in the proposal. When we think about what may have happened with Felicia, the executive director, lots of nonprofit connections all around the region. And so folks, as review committee members, so as peers in that room, would sometimes look to her and say, well, tell me about what you've seen in the community, in the real world, about these collaborations that are being put forward. What does this look like? How are they as a collaborative partner? Do you think that this is going to work? Or are they talking about this just for the sake of the application? So they were seeking her professional opinion based on the path that had brought her into that room. Perhaps what it is that's being looked at, there were actually two folks related to the banking industry on this particular review committee. And right, me, behind the camera. We were the folks that loved the numbers, absolutely loved looking at the budgets and the related information. Now, I've always been that way as a reviewer. I always read the budget work first, then I go to read the rest of the application. You got the executive for the bank, Dan, you've got the mortgage broker, Heather. They loved numbers, but they didn't understand all the nuances of nonprofit programming and the budgets that would go with it. So sometimes they would ask me my opinion about the budget, or what I thought about what I had seen in their tax filings, or what I had seen in some of their projections. And sometimes I would ask them questions too. Geez, you're in the community a lot and you serve on some different boards of directors. What have you seen? So it's not that the others weren't involved in the budget review conversations, but the three of us were really focused in on those parts of the application, wanted to make sure we had shared understanding and were seeing the same sort of things. All of those conversations are ways that reviewers can advocate for you when looking at your proposal. Seeking that additional understanding, the deeper knowledge about your work, which is so complex to any reviewer as they read about it for the first time, is great. But they don't do that if you don't have a strong base proposal. What reviewers are asking each other about, or maybe making notes in a margin or comments to the review panel about, they're usually minor things they're seeking to clarify. Gee, did someone else have a different understanding of what I understood from reading their logic model? Did someone have a slightly different interpretation of the way that project budget was presented? We're trying to just fine-tune understanding in order to help make recommendations. These questions that are getting asked usually aren't going to make a big difference from the yes to the no. It's usually fine-tuning who will get the yes. So what is it you can do to get into those fine-tuning conversations? Well, there are some things that I would like you to not say in applications. Folks will usually say, Diane, can you tell me what are the specific things? What are the key words I should use? What are the magic things I should say in the grant application to get funding? Unfortunately, there isn't such a thing. Now, maybe with the particular one funding opportunity or one particular funder, you might get to know their preferences and their language, and you might feel strongly about things to say in that one application. But each grant maker is so very different that there is not a universal say these things and you'll get the grant list. My, how I wish there were, but there's not. Instead, what my team and I have put together are the things not to say. These are things, they don't move you into the automatic no column for a reviewer, but what they do is they start to make the reviewer question the overall application. Sometimes it might distract them in their reading, it might slow them down, it might make them ask some extra questions, and so they will be less likely to advocate for you. Let me explain what each of these means. If, as an organization, you say in your grant proposal, we are not sure how we will continue the program after your grant funding ends, the grant maker is now worried that their investment only has that very specific cash value return. There's no extra potential for longer-term investment return. Now, how many of you, here, I'll even put a delineator in the chat box. You could choose to reply in the chat box or give me one of those reactions in the learning system. How many of you, but But this is true. We don't know how we're going to fund this after the grant funding runs out. This is our reality. Is anyone else thinking that right now? Y for yes, N for no. Reaction of choice in the learning tool. This is the reality. But this language, you're not giving yourself enough credit as an organization if this is what you say. So let's think about, where do you secure other revenue from? Maybe it's individual donors, maybe it's local businesses, maybe it's corporate giving, maybe there's some third-party events, maybe you've got one big special event, maybe there's other grant revenue that you're bringing in the door, but you probably have diversified funding resources. So while you say, Diane, I'm trying to be really transparent to the grant maker. I want to let them know, like, we're really just not sure how we're going to fund this. It's important work. You can say that you don't know who the exact funder will be that will support this work after the requested grant funds end. However, you have a strong history of securing diversified funding from a variety of sources, including, maybe list some. Our plan for securing funding to continue our work after your grant ends is this, and this. You can give the specifics of your past performance for diversified funding and what do you think is your future plan for securing the funding. That is a much bigger, more robust, more well-received statement than we're not sure how it's going to continue. I know, sounds a little flippant and sarcastic that last time when I said it on purpose, because you do know. But it's more about telling them the plan of how you will do it. Fine-tuning the language, but a big difference for how that comes across to a reviewer. Item number 2 on our do not say list. We hope to be able to. You don't have to tell me if you've ever used this phrase in a proposal. I am certain in my 20 plus years in the field that I have. But as a reviewer, this does not make me think that the applicant is super competitive, or I should say super confident in the work they're putting forward. Therefore, I'm not sure if it's really as compelling or if I should pick this other organization to advocate for that says, we are going to, we will. We hope to be able to. We will do this. Hear the difference? I know I'm giving a very different vocal dynamics to the two. You might say, but Diane, I don't want to commit to something that we are just not certain on in terms of outputs or outcomes that we would achieve. Understood. The grant agreement is not a commitment that you must, you absolutely, you have to. This is exactly what we're holding you to. Unless you're in a pay per performance contract situation, in which case, yes, you will get the money if you do those things. But 99% of the time, grant makers are understanding that what you are putting forward is your best laid plan based on your practiced wisdom and past expertise. Be confident. You will. This is what you think you will do. Very different than only, air quotes, hope. It comes across as softer and less confident in your own abilities. And grant makers, remember what I said they advocate for and why they advocate for? They advocate based on the confidence that they get from you about your own capacity. Make sure you use strong, confident language. While item 3 does sound similar to the first I mentioned, item number 3, please do not say we need your funding to continue to operate. I would love to hear from you in the chat box. What is it that funders care about? Spoiler alert, It is not if you are operating. What are other words or phrases that you could share in the chat box? What does the grant maker care about? It is not if you are operating. All right, Susan says the results of the funding. Yep, I like that. What else do funders care about? They don't. I mean, they're great people. Don't get me wrong. They were colleagues for me, right? They do not care if your lights are on and the doors are open to your building, to your organization. They care about impact. They care, yes, Sophia, also, how your missions align. Oh, there's that impact word right in what you typed. And if the funding will make an impact in the community. That goes to the results that Susan mentioned in the chat box. That's what they care about. I hear you. You're like, Diane, but I need their money to have the lights on and the doors open so that we can deliver said impact. Yes, I 100% understand you. But you don't want to tell them that that's what you need the funding to continue. You need the funding so we can continue to deliver hot meals to seniors in their home environment. We need your funding so that we can continue to offer our biweekly after-school STEM program. We need your funding so that, fill in the blank for impact, not so we can operate. Again, minor language shift, incredibly different meaning and understanding from the reviewers. All right, we're going to go in a slightly more technical direction for item number 4. Please do not use acronyms in your text. That's it. How many of you work for an organization that has an abbreviated version that is an acronym? Can you let me know in the chat box? You don't have to type out what it is, but can you let me know why for yes and for no? How many of you work for an organization that has a shortened version that you would use as an acronym in a grant proposal? All right, I see some of you do. I have worked with many organizations over my 20 years in business, and then all the organizations I've been on boards for and supported before, and nearly all of them have some sort of shorthand that they use. And they find their way into grant proposals. True story. I was in a government review role at the time, and one of my peer reviewers said to me, acronyms frustrate me so much. If I have a proposal that is peppered with acronyms, I just set it down and do it last. Last? Oh, that's not good, because you've already read then a whole stack of proposals and your brain is full of all this information. And while you want to give it your absolute best attention, you don't want to be put to the bottom of the pile for being read last because you frustrated a reviewer. So that's my point number 1 about not using acronyms. I'm climbing up on the soapbox, so get ready because I've got a few more points for your consideration. Also, in a review situation, I had the same acronym used for different, well, I should say the same like letters that formed the acronym were the same, but they had different meanings. The odds that that would happen did feel very slim, but I felt maybe I should have thought about the odds, done something. I don't gamble, but I'm like, my odds are in my favor. How did that happen? It was absolutely bananas for me as a reviewer to try and keep the two straight because of the way the acronyms overlapped. Now, I worked my way through it. I had some extra coffee, but that was not easy. Did not help either organization to get me to want to advocate for them. Now, on the flip side, you're right. There are some very long organizational names and there are some very short character counts that are in grant application portals. Here, I'll put a delineator in the chat box. How many of you find that you are using acronyms in your writing so that you can fit in word and character limits in the grant application, or maybe page limits overall, but you're trying to fit into the space that has been provided, therefore you use acronyms. Can you let me know? Show of hands in the chat box or other reaction in the learning tool. So the reason that like these tools, right, these online portals, the grant application limits, they're designed so that we don't go on and on and on and the reviewers can review all the applications. But sometimes the limits, yes, are so tight that we feel forced to use an acronym. Now, this organization knows that I like to use them as an example. I've been teaching their staff grant writing for years. So let's think about how we would abbreviate and use an acronym for New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. That is a lot of characters. Whew, that's a long one. They love to use the acronym NYCDOHMH. And so, yes, Carrie, to your point that you just put in the chat box, use the name first and then the acronym after. Yes, good practice. Can anybody tell me, what does the MH stand for NYCDOHMH? I just told you, and then I defined it. Could you tell me in the chat real quick, what did the MH stand for? It's all right, I'm gonna have a sip of tea. I'll wait while you type into the chat box for me. The MH was what in NYCDOHMH? You thought I was going to ask you what NYC stood for. No, that was too easy. What about that ending? What does the MH stand for in NYC DOH MH? Now that was a good idea from everybody that's typed so far. Mental health, it seems like that's what it should be. No. Mental hygiene. Now you might say, Diane, that is close enough. I think we're splitting hairs. Okay. Fine line for the difference. But we want our reviewers to never question what is their understanding of our work. So we don't want to use acronyms, if at all avoidable. And there are many times where it is avoidable. Now, for those times when that well-intentioned grant maker has given you a teeny tiny space to write, then yes, in every individual box of text that you get to write, I would understand if you followed what Carrie put in the chat box and you define what the word is, the name for the organization, you define in parentheses what the acronym is, and then you use it for that response. But then I want you to do it the next time you have to use it in a different box, 2-3 answers later, and the one after that, each and every time. You know why? Because not all grant makers, when they put things into the portal and take things out for reviewers, present them to reviewers in the order in which you answered them. So where you defined the acronym might not be where you think it is. And also, more importantly, reviewers rarely read in the order that it's presented. They flip around. They read the budget first, they read the logic model first, they go looking for your evaluation answer, and then they go read about the organization. It is rare that it is read in the order it was typed in the portal or submitted by all the reviewers. So it is very likely that they will encounter your acronym out of order. You will frustrate them. They will go either put you at the bottom of the pile, or they'll have to flip through the proposal to find where it was defined, and then might not come back to the same spot. So now they have a disjointed reading of your proposal. Yes, I spent a lot of time talking about acronyms, but it is worth it because for as many times as I'm a reviewer, literally I read 4 huge international proposals yesterday. The one I had no idea until page 7 of 38 what the acronym meant. And I was reading in order in that time. I don't know what TGI is. I don't know. Please tell me. Don't do it. Don't frustrate your reviewers. You want them to get super excited about you. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we don't want to make overly ambitious outcome statements. Here's what that means. If you're thinking about asking for $100,000. And you said, with this $100,000, we will end homelessness in San Francisco. I think we're missing a few zeros. With your $100,000, we will end childhood hunger in all of upstate New York. I was going to say New York, and I was like, oh, that still had New York. We'll just make it about upstate, not the city. So at least it was like fewer people. Those are incredibly ambitious statements. But I'm like, I'm really pretty sure you're missing a few too many zeros to make a statement like that. So it's not about tamping down your amazing goals and dreams as an organization. It's about having a grant budget, a grant request, a project budget that is the size of the outcome statement you are making. So I'm not sure if anyone has heard of the MacArthur Foundation's 100 and Change initiative. It was open like 3-4 months ago. Those are international grants for $100 million. That is a lot of zeros. So for $100 million, yes, you could do something big and huge and ambitious. Not for $100,000. So make sure that the scale and the overall impact you're proposing is aligned with the budget that you are presenting, or your grant makers will say, not realistic. Cool idea, super excited about your enthusiasm. Not feasible, not the right type of investment for us. It's too risky what you're trying to do without the right amount of money. I get super excited about my things not to say. I know, I do. Because I think they're as important, more important than what you should try to say. Because what you should try to say, again, is specific to each and every grant maker. But these 5 things, these hold true across all of the grants that I have reviewed in my entire career. Every single one of these holds true. Now, I'd love to see, nobody's asked me any questions. I thought I was going to get a little more pushback on acronyms, to be honest, but I didn't. It's a little question on it. But do you have any questions about those 5 things before we talk about some tactical tips for each of our best practice areas based on reviewers? Any specific questions from anyone right now? Everybody's doing okay? All right, if you have a question, write in that chat box at any time. It works for me. So grant readiness, industry jargon for grant competitiveness. How many of you would say, with emphasis, with a lot of excitement and emojis and pizzazz, that your organization is grant ready? I'm not like I'm hoping you are. I'm excited and curious to know who'd be like, yeah, Diane, that's us. We are grant ready. Could you let me know in the chat box, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10? 1, not ready, trying to get ready. 10, we're super ready. How do you feel about your grant readiness? The reason I give you a scale is when I ask you a yes or no, which is sometimes how a lot of groups will talk about it, you're like, yeah, I think we're grant ready. I mean, we want to get grants. We want to get grant revenue. I'm a good writer. Yeah, we're grant ready. Grant readiness is really more about what is the structure that's in place? What does it mean to be competitive for a foundation versus city versus state versus federal? So I asked you about your overall grant readiness. That wasn't really fair either, because you might have a different answer for readiness for foundations than you might for federal. Grant readiness is basically, they're the building blocks, they're the foundation of a successful grant seeking strategy. Now, one of the things that is a constant in terms of the blocks you might consider is a grant team. Now, to be super clear, when we talk about a grant team, I do not mean it has to be a team of grant writers, grant professionals, nonprofit fundraisers who like to write grants. That is not what a grant team is. Rather, a grant team is a group of colleagues in an organization that have a stake in seeing these grants be competitive and successful together. There's nothing about on the screen what their titles are, where they are on the org chart, how much time they do or do not commit to grant seeking support and writing and editing. No, it's not a full-time thing. It's the group of colleagues in the organization that have a stake in seeing grants be successful. How many of you think that you have a grant team, whether you call it that or not, in your organization? Whether you come together formally or informally, doesn't matter. Whether you're meeting mostly over Zoom or sometimes just having a lot of email exchange about opportunities. Maybe you come together to talk about the grant calendar. Maybe you come together not so much to talk about foundation grants, but really to talk about government grants. How many of you think that with my enhanced definition of grant team, clarifying that it is not a team of grant writers, of grant professionals, how many of you think that you have a grant team in your organization? A group, so at least 2 colleagues who have a stake in seeing grants be successful and are willing to collaborate to get the work done. All caps and an exclamation point. Carrie, I'm so excited for you. That's fantastic. I rarely get that much excitement when I ask the question. Carrie, give them all like a pat on the back, an extra high five, a gold star from me. That's awesome. All right, Susan, Jackie, yes, more folks with grant teams. Grant teams are magic. Not because you are necessarily going to have other people that are going to do the writing work, but because you are usually cross-functional in your skills. And so there's different perspectives to help make sure that people that love the budget are helping with budget. People that love logic models are helping to make sure that's right. People that love talking about smart objectives have a spot for their voice to be heard. So it's probably going to be a mix of roles within the organization and expertise and passion, which makes for a much stronger application, regardless of who you're writing to. Now, when we talk about grant readiness, there are not long lists of grant makers who are measuring your grant readiness. There are some who will have an application readiness tool or not quite eligibility, but they're asking you questions about the types of organizations they want to fund. Actually, I'll go back to MacArthur again, and that 100 and change process that was open a few months ago is one such example, because they're trying to make sure that the groups that are applying are not too small and are not in the wrong mission area for the type of work that they want to do and not in the wrong type of collaboration for what they want to do. They're trying to make sure that people are going to spend the amount of time on the application that this takes are the right types of organizations. So there are some really big application processes that do put like a readiness tool in. It is a self-assessment. It is not a required like gatekeeping thing always, but they do that to try and make sure you're spending your time in the best way possible. Now, aside from that, because again, most grant makers don't have something like that. Almost 10 years ago, if you can believe it, my team and I developed and released what's called the GRASP tool. And the GRASP tool is to help measure your grant readiness and give you a metric. And I could not put this in your course materials in the Learning Center because it's web-based. And good news, it's free. That's why I wanted to put it in your course materials, but I can only give you the link here in the chat. If you go to our website at dhleonardconsulting.com and you go to the upper bar that's got the GRASP tool, it should take you approximately 10 minutes, and you will get a grant readiness score. The score is not a guarantee that you will get the funding, and it is not like an academic test where I need to get a 100 in order to be an A+. No. It's actually on a scale of 120, so 120 is actually the true A+ on the tool. But what we're seeking and encouraging you to think about, if you're looking for federal funding, I would like you to get a score of 75 or higher. That is what years worth of data collection and a published article in the Grant Professionals Association Journal show is what we see for groups that are ready for federal grants. For foundation grants, you can have a lower score and be consistently competitive for foundation grants. The score is not a direct indicator of your likelihood of success. But again, having many hundreds of groups take the tool over the last 10 years, what we have validated is that there's some ranges in terms of most promising for ongoing sustainable success. Again, it is free. You do not have to take it. It's nothing that you can put into an application, but it's something that can give your organization some ideas on how to strengthen your organization's approach to grant seeking so that what you're really spending your time on are the rest of the best practices. Speaking of those best practices, let's head for our second portion of the grant life cycle and grant research. So, grant reviewer hat back on. Got another tip for you. A pro tip, a pro hack. Please do your homework, also known as grant research, before you apply to or talk to a grant maker. Now, that tool, that tip, I should say, does not tell you which tool you should use for grant research. There's lots of great options. What is most important is that you are looking for these 7 things when you're doing your grant research. How well does the mission align between you as an organization and the funder? Who have they funded before and for how much? Where are they funding? Do they like to get emails, or do they prefer to talk on social media, or do they like to talk on the phone? Do they tell you that you must call them or email them before you apply? Do they tell you you could email them if you had a question before you apply? If you have not found these 7 things and you go to reach out to the grant maker, the grant maker is going to be able to tell that you didn't do your homework. I have a teenager still in high school, and it's always amazing to her. She's one that loves to do her homework and make sure that it's turned in because, right, that usually helps to count for the grade. And she's always surprised that folks will like try to get it by with just a little bit. It was a long day. We had a late meet. We had a long game coming back from soccer, whatever. She's like, they tried to turn it in, and it wasn't all the way done. The teacher can tell, right? The grant maker can tell if you've like read just a little bit about them before you reach out, but not all of it, because you're going to be asking them questions that they have already answered in their annual report or on their website that you should be able to get from public data in their 990 filing. They can tell. I used to answer the phone and answer a lot of emails for the Michigan Women's Foundation, and I could tell who was calling me because, oh, look, they popped up in the database. That sounds like a good one. I read the like paragraph summary. I've got a few minutes. I'll call them now. Let's see if we can have a conversation. But they hadn't done the homework. You want to make sure that if you are reaching out to a grant maker, either you or a member of your grant team, or if you've got maybe your board involved, if you're going to spend the time to create talking points and do any sort of outreach, these talking points that I'm talking about, they're in the grant maker relationship guide, which should be in your course materials in the learning system. They're going to know. And so you want to make the best use out of the time that you, your colleagues, your board members are putting in for relationship outreach. Now, do hold that thought on relationship outreach for me for just a moment. As a sidebar, another tip based on what I've seen on the review side is you really want to have some sort of grant plan for the year. At least for 2 quarters, but ideally for like the whole fiscal year for your organization. Could you let me know how many of you have a grant calendar? Maybe it looks like an actual calendar, but could you let me know if you have a grant calendar in place for your organization? Why for yes and for no? If the answer is why for yes, I would love to hear where is your calendar? The idea behind the grant calendar is not about which tool or what structure or what format, but rather it's saying, here is how we are going to raise the funds that we need to achieve our priorities. That is what the grant calendar is, the visual representation of what I just said. Here is our plan for who we're going to apply for to get the money to do the priority work we want. So it is not about having a specific Google shared calendar or a specific Excel document or a specific grant management software. It is something that visually you and your colleagues, those grant team folks we talked about, that they have agreed, this is our plan for who we will apply to and when. It can be physical calendar on a wall in the office. That's fine. It can be sticky notes on the wall in the office. Also fine. It can be sticky notes virtually, visible to the team in a shared tool. Also amazing, all fine. Having a grant calendar, what's on our calendar is what we often prioritize day to day. So if we have a plan for what we want to apply for, we probably will be able to meet the deadline because we can see what it is that we've committed to. It also might mean that we could put on the calendar, that's right, our next grant best practice, grant relationships. So whether it's physical or digital, doesn't matter. That grant calendar should be something that any grant team member could get to. Doesn't mean they go every day. They don't have to, but they could if they wanted to. And what we want to see on there are things about building relationships with grant makers. So the fourth bucket of like the different ways I've thought about the tips, things that we've learned from being reviewers. Did you know that on some level, all grants are relationship based? Yeah, because it's people granting to people. It is not transactional like an ATM. Well, let me explain a little bit more about what I'm thinking there. All right, I would love for you to pretend that it is the end of the workday and that you are, maybe if you're working at home, you like close down the laptop. If you're working in an office, you commute back to home. You go to the mailbox. Now, please don't leave your laptop or leave your office. It's not the end of the workday. Don't get me in trouble with folks, but it's the end of the workday. And so you head for your mailbox and you have, let's see, it's a newsletter for a group you belong to and maybe a birthday party invitation and what else? A flyer to the local grocery store. Oh, and a request for $250 from an organization in your very own community that you have never given to before, you've never gone to an event for, you've never volunteered for, you're not on their email list, you're really not sure how they got your physical mailing address, but it has a real stamp, it's not bulk mailed, and it has your real address typed on it. It's not even a label. What do you do? Let me know in the chat box. How do you respond to that personal, unsolicited request? Recycle it, trash it, shred it, open up your checkbook, write $250 right away, go to their website, click donate now, $250. There is no judgment on your answer. I have been asking this question for years. I have a pretty good sense of what your responses will be. What do you do? Jackie, thank you for your candid answer. Trash can. You're like, why did I get this? Susan, same thing. Maybe a few of you will go, oh, I didn't know my friend was on that board now. Oh, well, that explains how they got my address. I'll give them 25. So those sort of things might happen. But you're like, not my cause. I'm not involved. You're surprised and you usually choose not to give. Can you imagine if you are applying to a grant maker that has any capacity or preference to communicate with you before you apply, and you just drop that request right into their inbox, drop that request right into their portal without ever talking to them? Ooh, that does not feel good. That feels like a surprised individual donor. Back when I was a program officer, I was so grateful. Our board and therefore our staff leadership, they were like, talk to anybody and everybody that wants to talk to you. Answer all their questions. Be on the phone. Email them back. Go to funder forums. Talk to people that want to talk to you. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So when someone would apply in any of the cycles that I managed, and they had not ever made a phone call, they had not emailed, like, where'd they come from? What? I've got like my phone number everywhere and my email everywhere. Where'd they come from? And so I would still put them through the whole like process. But then when the committee would say, okay, so Diane, what did you learn when like you talked to them before they applied? Nothing, because they didn't try to call us. They didn't try to email us. That was not good for those organizations. Like, why didn't they do it? We let them. They could have made it even better. So if the grant maker has any capacity to email, talk, see you in person at a conference, at a funder forum, you 110% should do that. Otherwise, your grant maker is going to feel like you just did at that theoretical mailbox. They might have to formally process it, but they're not opening their checkbook for that unexpected request. That is why I recommend that relationship outreach, phone, email, etc., is actually on the grant calendar for the team. Because some of it might be you if you're doing grants. Some of it might be for like your executive director. Some might be for a board chair. Some might be for an advisory committee member. So different people will help. If it's on the calendar, you'll make sure it happens. Oh, Carrie, like mic drops in the chat box today. Love it. We have a testimonial about how important grantmaker relationships are coming from your peer, Carrie, in the chat box. Carrie says they got their last 2 grants through chatting with a grantor. Relationships count. Yes, they do. And it's not just to get the first award, it's also to keep the awards. Remember how I said we don't want to treat our grant maker like it's a transaction? We don't want to treat them like an ATM. Why do we go to an ATM? Because we need cash. You're right. Remember I said I had a teenager? Right. They might have needed some money for school. And I'm like, where'd my money in my wallet go? Oh, I had to buy something for school. Okay. Guess it's time to go back to the ATM. Actually, it doesn't just take it without asking, but it makes for a much better example for the story. Can you imagine how a grant maker feels if they only hear from you when it's time to apply for money again? Uh-oh, like they're an ATM. Our grant money is just about out. It's time to call the community foundation. It's time to call the family foundation. It's time to call our program officer. That's like an ATM. Totally transactional. So I'm not saying you have to talk to them all the time. They're busy folks too. You're busy folks. But how can you engage in sincere stewardship during the course of a grant award? Yes, you have to write the like, thanks so much for the grant. And there were no goods or services received for this grant payment. You have to say that. But how else could you connect with them during the year so that it's not ATM-like in your interactions? If you have anything that you want to humble brag about for how you've stewarded a grant relationship, you've invited folks to an event, you've interacted with them on social media, you invited them to an open house, a ribbon cutting, you sent them a video clip of a performance that happened. something, anything. Ah, Jackie, great question. How do you do this with federal grants? Okay, so with government grants, stewardship is a whole extra different concern, right? Now, the relationship building part is still all true because there's people being paid to manage those grants, and those relationships, those still count. Not in your score, but in terms of understanding programs. But you're right. This part of relationships, the post-award part, that's trickier. So if you think about the ATM transaction analogy, state and federal can feel more transaction-like. Put your reimbursement request in the portal and you'll get the money. Put in your reports about how you've been collecting your evaluation data and get them in on time. But there still is it's people managing and awarding grants to people, you. And so, for example, we work with an organization in a large city in the US that has had multiple SAMHSA grants, so federal funding, health and human services, substance abuse, mental health. And they have fantastic relationships with their program managers. Absolutely fantastic. And it is not because they turn in their financial reports on time and they turn in their programmatic reports on time. That's, yes, helpful, but it's because they will interact with them. They will keep them up to date. They will ask some questions. They have meaningful, sincere interactions. And so that is also aligned with what I'm saying here about not being ATM-like. So it might look a little different, philanthropy, foundations versus government stuff, but the same base concept exists. You're working with people. How do you help them understand your work and not be surprised when we come to grant reporting a little bit later on? So some tips related to grant writing. And I'm not going to go deep into these because, well, quite frankly, that would be giving away the rest of our grant writing curriculum. I want you to come see us, the Native Learning Center, as like these are like 90-minute topics. I'm just giving them to you in little tiny tip form from what it sounds like for a reviewer. So if we talk about SMART objectives, SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And lots of grant makers will put in their instructions that they want SMART objectives. In fact, many grant makers are now saying SMARTY objectives. I just typed that into the chat box. The I for inclusion, the E for equity. SMART is the baseline. Even if grant makers don't say it, they expect that you write your objectives in a SMART way. If you're not comfortable with that as an organization, regardless of who you're applying to for funding, you should practice together how to make them stronger, get outside feedback before you submit to grant makers. But if you don't write your objectives in SMART structure, your reviewers are going to have a lot of unanswered questions. Students, what grade level? Oh, 6, 7, 8. Yes, that specific would have helped me understand it. When is this happening? By the end of the calendar year. Oh, great. Okay, good. What curriculum are we talking about? Oh, the scientifically based evidence practice. Yeah, that one. Good, good. Okay. See, I started by having like unanswered questions, and then I filled in the blank with what might have been listed in the SMART objective. If your reviewers have unanswered questions, like the ones I theoretically posed about objectives, it is unlikely they will want to advocate for you. Now, very related to SMART objectives, we're putting a spotlight on the M in the SMART objectives. Don't skim over our impact. How is it that we're going to know we're creating this great impact, that we're having success? Grant makers, they want to be part of your success. It's a little bit different than the idea in individual fundraising where you make your donor a hero in your story. Has anybody here ever heard of that? In fundraising, you're trying to make your individual donor the hero of your story. Let me know if you've heard that before in the chat box. I only do grants, but I'm surrounded by awesome colleagues who do fundraising. So I've heard them say this many times over the years. And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess our grant maker, like we sort of make them a little bit like the hero, like your help here, your money is going to make the difference. But what our grant makers, remember what we talked about, the things we don't say? Our grant makers care about impact. Not that the lights are on, not that the doors are open, not that we're operating, they care about the impact. They want to know, what does success look like? So they want to be able to visualize, what does success look like? You don't need to use that exact phrasing. Dear grant maker, success with your funding looks like fill in the blank. But you could. It can be a little more abstract than that, but they should know, wow, our money, what I expect to hear about in my report, once we fund you, it's going to be about this. Oh, that'll be so cool to hear how that went to deliver those 2 different curriculums and that you reached 550 youth. Yeah, wow, that's going to be so cool to hear about what they're going to do with that new knowledge. Yeah, that'll be great. Help them to understand, what will it look like? You might say, oh, I'm not sure I like the, what does success look like language. Like when I do different reviews for different grant makers, there will be questions that they put forward. I'm like, oh, I really like the way they worded that. And I keep them in a little fun file of like, oh, this was a good example. I like this. This example comes from that sort of keeping of information that I do that's so fun. This is a question that was structured to get understanding by the grant maker of how the organization would measure impact. Now, I do wish that they'd given a little bit more than 2,500 characters, but what I really appreciated about it, because it made for some really robust responses, look at the sub-questions that are here. Who's responsible for measuring the outcome? What tool or tools is used to measure the outcome? When is the outcome measured? Why is it measured in the manner presented? Oh, chef's kiss. It was beautiful for the responses that were received, and therefore I got to read as a reviewer. I was so grateful for the structure that had been proposed because it meant really good responses. And I thought, wait, we should tell other people that if you're not sure how or what you want to write about your evaluation, use these prompts on the screen. You don't have to use them as headings because they're not the funder's specific questions, but if you are answering these 4 questions, thinking about measuring your impact, your reviewer is going to have a really nice understanding of what success will look like and how you will be able to report on, did it happen or maybe not, and like why. Ooh, absolutely. They will be so excited and ready to advocate for you. Now, evaluation, I know, is not everybody's favorite thing in grants, so I did want to share 2 of my favorite resources. And so when we think about what these 2 websites help us with, so the first thing to consider is that the Kellogg Foundation, yes, like the big money Kellogg Foundation, they are fantastic in terms of having lots of great resources. And so they've got a resource directory and some evaluation and logic model information there. And then even if your work is not health focused, the CDC website also has some great evaluation information. Now I'm going to try and post both those links in the chat box at one time. One was clickable, the other one not. Let's try that one more time. Did not want to work for me there to make that a clickable link, but I think you can copy it and paste it right into your browser. Hopefully that works. But also you can see those in your slides in the PDF. We got to my favorite part of the application. Now, it's not tip number 8 because of, I think, where it falls in importance. No, to me, budget is number 1. But rather, we are thinking about number 8 as budget because this is about in the application where it falls. Pretty late on in the process. Unfortunately, sometimes an afterthought. But the budget by itself really tells and sells the whole story. I can learn a lot about a program in just a one-sheet budget versus 7, 8, 10 pages of narrative. True story. So what grant makers are looking for is not just a quick, easy understanding of your program. What is the story that's put forward? Is it consistent? Does the narrative and the narrative responses, do they tell the same story as what your budget numbers tell and what your budget justification might tell? So here's from a reviewer's perspective where things go wrong. It's not usually that the number on the cover sheet or in the portal, main information, it's not that that usually doesn't match what's typed in a narrative or what's typed in the budget form. What goes wrong is that there's something about the way the story was put forward that does not align with the budget and with any justification provided. For example, if you are in a very rural community and you tell the grant maker how public transit doesn't exist. True story in my own community. There is no public transit. Uber, not here. So there's really no options. And for folks to be able to get to medical providers, there is a critical access hospital that for some folks might be within 15 minutes. But still, like, how are you going to get 15 minutes by car? Most things that they're trying to get, especially to specialists, 30, 40, up to an hour and a half away. So if you've just presented that story in your narratives to a grant maker, and that you tell them that your solution is to put staff in the community doing things in home environments instead of making the patients come to you, what would you expect to see in the budget? Money for mileage reimbursement. Small, tiny detail on the budget, but if it's not there, the reviewer's like, wait, I thought we were putting all the staff in their cars and they were driving. Mileage reimbursement is no small chunk of change. I'm confused. When a reviewer makes the confused or thoughtful thinking emoji face, not good. They're not going to advocate for you. They have unanswered questions. Now they're like, wait a second, are they really going to be able to implement this with the money the way they said they would? They didn't have any budget for mileage. Maybe it's something different, not about that mileage and transportation story. Maybe it's because in the work plan or the key activities narrative, you were talking about which staff would do the specific things. And then the grant maker got to your budget and those people are not in your budget. So how are you paying for the people you said were going to do the work? They're not in the budget. Or vice versa. They're in the budget, but why aren't you talking about them doing real things? Any of those are inconsistencies that make reviewers, unfortunately, scratch their head. So what you want to focus on is giving as much explanation and detail as possible when it comes time to do your grant budget and to think about how you can show your justification. How can you make it so that they align? I could talk budget all day, but it's just one of the many tips from being a reviewer. Now this next one, Krista from our team is our in-house copy editor, and this is one of her favorites to talk about. So I'm going to try and channel my inner Krista energy to talk about copy editing and why we don't self-edit our applications or our proposals before we click submit. It doesn't matter what style guide you're following, whether it's APA or MLA, and it's not that a grant maker is going to say, no, you don't get funded because you did or did not use the Oxford comma. It's that the clarity in which we write, if I'm caffeinated and I'm typing, whoo, I've got some good ideas. And then I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's good work. And maybe I tweak a few things. I'm like, oh, that's a good project description. I'm happy with that. And then I let Krista come in to edit. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. I used the word that all over the place. Didn't need it. Oh, and the phrase in order to. I had it in there too. Yeah, yep. Oh, I did make a big assumption of your knowledge here. Oh, you're right. That wasn't my clearest sentence. Oh, thank you. Now, yes, you're right. Grammar check, spelling check built in. You might have the free version of Grammarly. Certainly helps. But none of those tools are helping to really think in terms of our tone. They're technical, so it's a good base. So if you don't have someone who can be your Krista, in terms of someone who's helping to strengthen the work, to ask questions, try to make it stronger and clearer for any reviewer from any background, yes. At a minimum, the free version of Grammarly, excellent for editing. But you have gotten way too close to what you've been working on. So I really want you to think about, who could you ask for help from? Who could be your fresh set of eyes to say, I had a question about this part. I think maybe you might want to rework these 2 paragraphs here. Now, I'm wondering, do any of you already have a go-to person who, whether they would call themselves a copy editor or not, that they love to be your fresh eyes on grant applications before you submit? If you do have a person like that, would you want to type their initials or their first name into the chat box? We're going to give them like a big shout out. We're going to collectively say, hey, who are the folks who are helping to self-edit or to edit so we don't self-edit? So let's do initials and first names, either or, in the chat box. Those folks who are helping with our editing absolutely are making a difference in getting extra funding. Again, it's not about Oxford comma or not, APA style versus MLA. No, that's not going to be what your reviewers are talking about. But if it's hard and clunky and a little bit confusing for the reviewers to understand your point, that'll make it hard. So it's not the technical grammar that's going to get you, but it's the clarity of your message and having someone else, fresh eyes. So whether it's Raven or C Tiger or Kylie or whoever else you're thinking of that you didn't type into the chat box, please tell them thank you. Maybe you see them later today or tomorrow. If you don't see them today or tomorrow, say, hey, I gave you a shout out in a webinar. Tell them they're awesome and you need them. They help make it so that when your reviewers are looking at your grant proposals, because they're fresh eyes, right, learning about you for the first time, that you've gotten rid of some of those questions that you could address on your own. Now, there is one last tip. And this is about actually thinking like a reviewer. So there's copy editing, which is what we were just talking about. Somebody with fresh eyes, maybe having an opinion about commas or about structure, but definitely about clarity from their perspective. This last idea, this is to say, when you're doing applications, the editing that's in that chart on the left-hand side, that is what you're usually asking of someone like Raven, someone like Kylie. Maybe a comma here or there, help them with word choice. Get rid of that in order to phrase. You don't need that there. Strike it through. And it is really about their opinion on clarity. But we need it. Don't get me wrong, we absolutely need it. Mock review is taking it a step higher and saying, okay, great, we've done all our grammar stuff, all our copy editing. Now let's take the proposal that is so close to being done that we could submit it, and let's see what people would think if they were the grant maker and how they would score it. So to me, it's like a Venn diagram. If I think about these 2 ideas, there's what happens with copy editing, circle on the left, and then there's mock review. How do we review our proposal, have someone with fresh eyes pretend they were a grant maker and tell us? How would they score us? What questions would they have? If we do both, so copy editing circle on the left, mock review circle on the right, the Venn diagram overlap is what's going to result in the highly competitive application. Either thing by themselves, copy editing would be okay, would help. Mock review by itself, it would help. If we do both, we are putting ourselves in a position for the strongest application so that reviewers are super excited to give us a great score and say yes. So mock reviews look really different for different proposals. What you're looking for in guidelines are things that tell you how will the reviewer, folks like me, how will they score your proposal? Where will they give you points? Or what questions are they having to look for responses to? What might their scoring sheet look like? Different grant makers have different versions of this. The most important spot where this will happen, government proposals. So unlike some of that relationship stuff, which felt very foundation-like, mock review is easiest to do in terms of understanding structure if you're thinking about government grants. Now, whether you choose to or have the ability to do mock review or not, there is something that you should do. Grant reviewers, whether paid, pro bono, board member, they're opinionated about what they have read. And their opinion and their perspective is leading to you getting funding, or maybe not. You should ask for a copy of the feedback from the reviewers. If you get denied, be sad about it for a minute or two, or maybe a little more, but then ask the reviewer for the feedback so that you can try and improve the next time. If you get the feedback, if you get funded, if you get funded, absolutely celebrate as a team. And then ask for feedback. Find out what they liked. Find out what they scored highly, what they said, great job on that. Man, that budget was amazing. Ask them for the feedback. What's that going to help you with? Well, it's going to help you as you think about the final of the grant seeking best practices. If you get the award, you know now by asking for feedback on the proposal they reviewed, you'll know what did they like. You'll know what you might want to focus on extra in your reports. And regardless of what they say for feedback, you will know that you're not going to treat your grant makers like an ATM. You're not going to treat them transactionally, because those were real people that read and scored and advocated for your proposal to be funded. It was not AI. It was not artificial intelligence. It was people reading and scoring your proposals. So we're not going to have it be transactional. We're not going to let our grant makers be surprised by what implementation looks like. Because guess what? Even though you got the money, now when you go to apply the next time, the grant makers and the reviewers in the room will talk about, well, what was it like while you were a grantee? So now they'll be talking not just about what does your application say and what questions do they have and advocating based on that. They'll be talking about what happened while you were implementing the program as well. So now you've got two things happening. One, a formal application, and the other, their perspective on what it was like to have you as a grantee. I know, right? Little kiddo sitting there at the computer kind of holding their face like, oh. But that's why I wanted to share with you, because a lot of folks will say, okay, I get like all the pre-stuff. But it's the post stuff with grant reporting and grant management. It's going to come right back to the decision-making table when you have reviewers sitting together around looking at your next application. Don't forget that part. All the people that interact with your work before and after and during all can be reviewers that have a voice in whether or not you get funded again. Okay, I could talk grants all day and share like what was it like to be a reviewer for this funder and for that funder, but our time does fly when we're here together. And so I want to make sure that you know how to find me if you have a question after today. I'm going to entertain any and all questions you have in the chat box right now, but you are more than welcome to reach out with any questions afterwards. I'll type my email into the chat as well. And then if you're like, Diane, no thank you, no email, no more stuff in my inbox. If you want to ask a question anywhere on social media, a LinkedIn direct message, I get it. It doesn't feel like email. That's fine. One less thing in your inbox. So wherever you want to ask a question is absolutely where I'm happy to answer them. I'm going to keep an eye out for other questions that might come up, but also I think we're ready to talk about your survey link and any final closing details. There it is, the survey link. We still thank you. But thanks everybody for being here, and please feel free to reach out with any follow-up questions.
Thank you so much, Diane. You did an incredible job, and we greatly appreciate you for all your helpful tips. They certainly were amazing, and I hope everyone was able to jot them down. Please don't forget to fill out the feedback survey. As Diane said, it greatly helps her, and I know she greatly appreciates it. So please don't forget to fill out those feedback forms. They are anonymous. Don't forget to sign up for our next webinar. It's going to be how to use a logic model to increase your grant seeking success. It's going to be on November 7th with Diane Leonard. So please don't forget to join us that day. Show times are 2 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. CST, 12 p.m. MST, 11 a.m. PST, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. Please don't forget to join us. And as always, you can access our webinar recordings as well as this one on our YouTube channel at Cathedral Webinar Archive. The link is right there. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And as always, we have a podcast called Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast, and you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you. And once again, thank you, Diane. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye-bye.